Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He was the elder of two boys born to Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. Outwardly, his childhood appeared ordinary, but a closer look reveals hints of the darkness that would consume him. As a young boy, Dahmer developed a fascination with dead animals. He would collect animal carcasses, dismember them, and keep their bones as trophies. This morbid interest foreshadowed the horrors he would later inflict on human victims. Some experts believe that Dahmer's dysfunctional family life contributed to his psychological deterioration. His parents' tumultuous relationship and eventual divorce, coupled with his mother's struggles with mental illness, created an unstable environment for the young boy. Despite these early warning signs, Dahmer's descent into madness remained largely undetected. To the outside world, he was an unremarkable youth, blending into the background of his suburban upbringing. However, beneath the surface, a monster was brewing. In 1978, at the age of 18, Jeffrey Dahmer committed his first murder. The victim was Stephen Hicks, a hitchhiker whom Dahmer had picked up and invited back to his parents' house. Dahmer's motive, like many of his subsequent murders, stemmed from a desire for complete control and possession. He lured Hicks into a false sense of security, offering him alcohol and companionship. Once Hicks was intoxicated and vulnerable, Dahmer strangled him to death. The act of killing Hicks ignited a dark and insatiable appetite within Dahmer, one that would drive him to commit increasingly horrific acts over the next 13 years. After the murder, Dahmer dismembered Hicks's body in the basement of his parents' home. He scattered the remains in the woods behind the house, attempting to erase any trace of his crime. This first murder marked a point of no return for Dahmer, solidifying his transformation from a troubled youth into a cold-blooded killer. As Dahmer's reign of terror continued, his methods became more calculated and depraved. He primarily targeted young men, often from marginalized communities, whom he would lure to his apartment with promises of money, drugs, or sex. Dahmer's modus operandi typically involved drugging his victims before strangling them. He would then engage in necrophilia and dismemberment, often preserving body parts as gruesome souvenirs. In a chilling confession to police, Dahmer described his compulsion to keep his victims with him. He admitted to consuming human flesh on several occasions, claiming a twisted desire to make his victims a permanent part of him. Dahmer's apartment became a macabre testament to his crimes, filled with the tools of his gruesome trade and the decaying remains of his victims. The stench of death permeated the building, yet his crimes remained undetected for years. Despite the escalating depravity of his crimes, Jeffrey Dahmer managed to maintain a veneer of normalcy. He held down a job at a chocolate factory, frequented gay bars, and engaged in seemingly ordinary social interactions. This stark contrast between his public persona and his private horrors is one of the most unsettling aspects of his case. Neighbors described Dahmer as quiet and polite, though somewhat reclusive. His co-workers knew him as a reliable employee, oblivious to the sinister secrets he harbored. Dahmer's ability to compartmentalize his life, to separate his monstrous urges from his daily routine, is a chilling reminder that evil can lurk beneath the most unassuming facades. This dichotomy between Dahmer's public and private selves continues to intrigue and disturb criminologists today. How could someone capable of such unimaginable cruelty blend so seamlessly into everyday life? The answer, it seems, lies in the depths of Dahmer's psychopathy, a profound inability to feel empathy or remorse. His deceptive charm and calculated manipulation allowed him to evade detection for over a decade, highlighting the chilling reality that monsters can hide in plain sight. On July 22, 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer's reign of terror came to an abrupt end. His final intended victim, Tracy Edwards, managed to escape Dahmer's apartment and flag down police. Edwards, still handcuffed, led officers back to the apartment where they encountered a scene of unimaginable horror. Inside, police discovered Polaroids of dismembered bodies, human remains stored in the refrigerator, and a vat filled with acid, which Dahmer had used to dispose of some of his victims. The gruesome discoveries at Dahmer's apartment sent shockwaves through Milwaukee and the nation. The media descended upon the scene, eager to report on the depraved acts of the Milwaukee Monster. The public was captivated and horrified by the details of Dahmer's crimes, struggling to comprehend the depths of his depravity. The arrest of Jeffrey Dahmer exposed a chilling reality. A serial killer had been living undetected in their midst, preying on vulnerable young men for over a decade. Section 6. Justice and Condemnation, Dahmer's Confession and Trial. Following his arrest, Jeffrey Dahmer waived his right to remain silent and confessed to his crimes in chilling detail. He provided investigators with a meticulous account of each murder, describing his methods and motivations with chilling detachment. Dahmer's confession, captured on videotape, offered a disturbing glimpse into the mind of a serial killer. He expressed little remorse for his actions, claiming that his compulsions were driven by an insatiable desire for control and possession. In 1992, Dahmer stood trial for 15 counts of murder. The trial was a media spectacle, with reporters and spectators from around the world flocking to the Milwaukee courtroom. Dahmer's defense team pursued an insanity plea, arguing that his crimes were the result of a severe mental defect. However, the jury ultimately rejected this argument, finding Dahmer guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms in prison, ensuring that he would spend the rest of his days behind bars. Section 7. Life Behind Bars, Imprisonment and Reflections. Following his conviction, Jeffrey Dahmer was incarcerated at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. He spent his days in solitary confinement, isolated from other inmates for his own protection. While incarcerated, Dahmer reportedly expressed remorse for his crimes and sought religious solace. He was baptized into the Church of Christ by a visiting minister and claimed to have found God. However, his expressions of remorse were met with skepticism by the families of his victims, many of whom believed that he was simply trying to manipulate the system. Despite the horrific nature of his crimes, Dahmer managed to cultivate relationships with some individuals, including prison staff and a pen pal. These interactions offered a glimpse into the complex and contradictory nature of the man behind the monster. His time in prison was a period of reflection, as he grappled with the consequences of his actions and the legacy he would leave behind. Section 8. A Brutal End, Dahmer's Death in Prison. On November 28, 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer's life came to a violent end. He was attacked and beaten to death by a fellow inmate, Christopher Scarver, while performing cleaning duties in the prison gymnasium. Scarver, who was serving a life sentence for murder, claimed that he had been repulsed by Dahmer's crimes and had grown increasingly disturbed by his behavior in prison. He alleged that Dahmer would taunt other inmates with his gruesome crimes, even fashioning severed limbs out of prison food to resemble human body parts. Dahmer's death brought a sense of closure to the families of his victims, many of whom had long awaited his demise. However, it also reignited the debate over the death penalty and the effectiveness of the criminal justice system in dealing with violent offenders. While some saw his death as a fitting end for a monster, others questioned whether the prison system had failed in its duty to protect him from harm. Section 9. The Legacy of a Monster, Remembering the Victims and Seeking Justice. The legacy of Jeffrey Dahmer continues to haunt Milwaukee and the nation. His crimes left an indelible scar on the families of his victims, who continue to grapple with the loss of their loved ones and the horrific circumstances of their deaths. Dahmer's case also exposed systemic failures within the criminal justice system, highlighting the challenges of identifying and apprehending serial killers, particularly those who prey on marginalized communities. In the years since Dahmer's death, there have been numerous books, documentaries, and films that have attempted to understand the psychology of this notorious killer. However, the true nature of his evil may never be fully comprehended. Today, as we reflect on the life and crimes of Jeffrey Dahmer, it is imperative that we remember the victims and their families. We must honor their memory by advocating for justice, working to prevent future tragedies, and striving to create a world where such atrocities are unthinkable.